You know, people always talk about how the holidays are supposed to bring families together. You see it in movies, you hear it in songs, the perfect Christmas dinner, the warm laughter, everyone putting differences aside and celebrating. But let me tell you something, that's not always how it goes. At least, not in my family. See, every holiday season, we all gather at my parents' house. It's tradition, a tradition that's been running for as long as I can remember. Turkey on the table, the smell of cinnamon and baked pies filling the house, kids running around in excitement, adults catching up on their lives. On the surface, it looks picture perfect. But lurking underneath all that cheer is a crack in the foundation. And that crack has a name. Mark. Mark is my cousin. Technically, we're the same age, grew up going to the same family gatherings, even played together as kids. But somewhere along the line, he turned into, well, let's just say, the most entitled person I've ever met. He's the kind of guy who walks into a room and acts like he owns it. Always bragging, always comparing, always expecting the spotlight. And every single holiday dinner, without fail, Mark makes it all about him. I still remember last year. He showed up an hour late, didn't apologize, and then complained that the turkey was too dry like my mom had failed some 5-star Michelin test. He brought his new girlfriend and let me tell you, he paraded her around like she was a trophy, making little digs about how he was finally dating someone with class. That was his exact phrase. In front of my wife. In front of everyone. But the worst part? Everyone lets it slide. My parents don't like conflict, my aunt, his mom, makes excuses for him, and the rest of the family just shrugs it off. That's just Mark, they say. You know how he is. Yeah, I know how he is. He's a spoiled brat who's been coddled his whole life. So, this year, when I pulled up to my parents' driveway, I already had this gut feeling. You know, that tightness in your chest, that little whisper in your mind saying, this is going to be one of those nights. The house looked beautiful. Lights strung up on the roof, the glow of the Christmas tree visible from the front window. My kids were excited, they ran up the front steps before I even got the gifts out of the trunk. My wife gave me a quick glance, like she could read my mind, and said softly, let's just try to get through tonight without a scene. I nodded, but inside, I was already bracing myself. The second I walked through the door, I was hit with the familiar chaos. My mom, rushing around the kitchen, trying to keep the food warm. My dad pretending to help but really just standing there with a glass of wine. My sister, setting up the table with her usual obsessive attention to detail. And, of course, the background noise of chatter and laughter. It should have been comforting. It should have felt like home. But the air was thick. Thick with anticipation, like everyone was waiting for the storm to roll in. And sure enough, it rolled in. The door swung open with that dramatic slam only Mark could pull off. He walked in like he was making an entrance at a red carpet premiere. Designer coat, loud cologne, that smug smirk plastered on his face. And trailing behind him, of course, was yet another new girlfriend. She looked around nervously, like she hadn't quite been briefed on what she was walking into. Poor girl. Ah, the party can finally start, Mark announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. He dropped his coat on the nearest chair, not the coat rack, mind you, but right on the dining chair my dad had just set aside. I felt my jaw tighten. I swear I could see my wife give me a subtle nudge, like don't start. Mark. You made it, my mom said politely, though I could tell she was stressed. We're just about to sit down. Perfect timing, he said, patting his stomach. Hope the turkey's better this year. And just like that, the evening officially began. Dinner started off calm enough. We all sat down, plates were passed around, kids giggled, adults clinked glasses. But, as usual, Mark took control of the conversation. He launched into stories about his big promotion, though from what I've heard, he barely holds down his job. He bragged about his new car, his new apartment, his supposed investments. And every story, every little comment, came with some kind of jab. When my sister mentioned her kids' soccer games, Mark smirked and said, "Well, not everyone is cut out for athletics. Guess they got your genes." When my dad tried to talk about the weather, Mark rolled his eyes and interrupted with, "God, Dad, you always talk about the most boring stuff." Even when my wife complimented the wine, Mark chuckled and said, "You know, real wine connoisseurs wouldn't buy this brand. But hey, it's drinkable." I clenched my fork so tight, I thought it might snap. But the worst part was how everyone just laughed it off. My aunt chuckled like Mark was hilarious, my parents exchanged uneasy looks, and the rest of the table tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. Nobody wanted to confront him. Nobody but me. Inside, I could feel the heat building. The longer he talked, the more I thought about every single year had pulled this. The way he belittled people, the way he acted like the center of the universe, the way he embarrassed my family. And I knew this dinner was going to end without fireworks. Because this year I was going to let it slide. I sat there, sipping my drink, keeping my eyes on him, and I thought, go ahead, Mark. Keep running your mouth. Just wait until I decide to open mine. And that's when I realized this holiday dinner was just going to be another painful memory. This was going to be the year Mark finally got exposed. Now, let me tell you, dinners with Mark are always like walking a tightrope. One wrong step and the whole thing falls apart. But this year, it didn't take long for him to start bouncing on the rope just to see if it would snap. At first, he kept it subtle. And I use that word loosely, because nothing Mark does is actually subtle. It's like he lives for the spotlight, like he breathes in it, and chokes without it. We were passing around the mashed potatoes when he leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "So John's still working at that same little company? What's it been 10 years now?" I didn't even look up right away. I scooped a spoonful onto my plate, set the bowl down gently, and then glanced at him. "Yeah, still there." "Wow," he said, dragging out the word. "I mean, hey, stability is good, right? Not everyone is cut out to climb the ladder. Some of us just stay in our comfort zone." He said it with that smug little laugh, the one that makes you want to reach across the table and wipe it off his face. I saw my wife stiffen next to me. She knew it was a jab, everyone did. But, of course, no one said anything. My aunt gave an awkward chuckle, my dad cleared his throat, and my mom quickly changed the subject. But me? I just nodded and smiled. "You're right, Mark. Not everyone is cut out for constant change." And I swear, the way his smile faltered for half a second, it was like a crack in the armor. But he recovered quickly and leaned back in his chair, acting like he'd won some battle. That was just the beginning. A few minutes later, when my sister started telling a story about her kids winning their school's holiday art contest, Mark rolled his eyes. "Art contest? Come on. Participation trophies for coloring inside the lines. Big deal." Her face fell, and I could see the embarrassment in her eyes. I wanted to say something, but before I could, he turned his attention back to me. "You know, John," he said, tapping his fork against his plate, "I remember when we were kids, you always talked about starting your own business. What happened to that dream?" I raised an eyebrow. "Life happened. Family. Priorities. Some dreams shift, you know?" He chuckled, shaking his head. Translation: it was too hard. You gave up. And just like that, the table went quiet. Dead quiet. All you could hear was the clinking of silverware. Now, here's the thing, I could have exploded right then. I could have slammed my fork down, leaned across the table, and told him exactly where to shove his opinion. But instead, I smiled. Because the angrier he made me, the more I realized something: Mark was just rude. He was careless. Careless with his words, careless with the truth, careless with how much he revealed about himself. And if I was patient, he'd end up exposing himself without me even trying. But patience has limits. Halfway through dinner, when the kids were running around playing and the adults were sipping wine, Mark decided to kick things up a notch. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and smirked. "So, John, what's it like knowing you're how do I put this, the average one in the family?" I froze. "Excuse me. You know what I mean," he said, waving his hand casually. "Your sister's kids are winning awards, I'm moving up in my career, Mom brags about me all the time." "Mark," my aunt interjected sharply, her cheeks turning red. "That's enough." But he ignored her. "And then there's you. Just steady. Predictable. Nothing to brag about." The table was silent again, and this time, it was just awkward. It was tense. You could feel the air shift, heavy and uncomfortable. I looked him dead in the eyes. "Careful, Mark." But he just smirked, like he'd scored a point in some twisted game. And that was the moment I decided enough was enough. Now, here's where things started to really unravel. See, Mark has this habit of talking too much when he feels powerful. He brags, he overshares, and he thinks nobody's going to challenge him. So, when he launched into this big story about his promotion, the one he'd been bragging about since he walked through the door, I listened carefully. He talked about how he negotiated a huge salary bump, how his boss relies on him for everything, how he's basically running the place now. But then he slipped. "Of course, it's not all fun and games," he said, swirling his wine dramatically. "Sometimes you have to cut corners, bend the rules a little. You know how it is. You do what you gotta do to get ahead." I tilted my head. "Bend the rules? What does that mean?" He smirked. "Trade secrets, cousin. You wouldn't understand." But I did understand. I understood perfectly. Because a few months ago, I'd heard from a mutual friend that Mark had been caught in some shady office drama. Something about taking credit for a coworker's project. At the time, I didn't know if it was true. But hearing him hint at it, that was confirmation. And right then, I knew I had ammunition. The question was when to fire it. Dessert came out: pumpkin pie, pecan pie, all the works. Normally, it's the highlight of the night. But this year, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mark was still holding court, cracking jokes at other people's expense, bragging about his investments, making his girlfriend laugh a little too loudly. And then, it happened. The spark that lit the fuse. My daughter, bless her heart, innocently asked, "Uncle Mark, why don't you ever bring presents for the kids?" The table went silent. My wife's eyes widened. My mom started to shush her, but it was too late. Mark laughed loud, fake, dismissive. "Because, sweetheart, Uncle Mark spends his money on important things. Not on toys that'll be broken in a week." My daughter's little face fell. She looked down at her lap, embarrassed, hurt. And in that instant, something in me snapped. I put my fork down, leaned forward, and looked Mark square in the eyes. "You know, Mark," I said slowly, my voice calm but sharp, "it's funny you say you spend your money on important things. Because from what I hear, you spend most of your time spending other people's money." The whole table froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shot back, his smirk faltering. "Oh, you know," I continued casually, "taking credit for coworkers' projects, bending the rules, cutting corners. I mean, isn't that how you got that so-called promotion?" His face turned red. That's a lie. I shrugged. Sure it is. But funny how I've heard the same story from more than one person. And funny how you basically admitted it just now. The room erupted in whispers. My aunt looked horrified, my parents stared at me in shock, and Mark's girlfriend looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Mark stammered, trying to recover. You don't know what you're talking about. But the thing was, I did. And now, everyone else was starting to wonder if I was right. That was the moment the dinner shifted. Up until then, Mark had controlled the room. Had been the loudest, the most confident, the one everyone tiptoed around. But now, the spotlight was on him. And for once, he didn't look so confident. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and let the silence hang heavy. Let everyone take in what had just been said. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because tonight was just going to be another awkward holiday dinner. Tonight, Mark was finally going to be exposed for who he really was. You ever notice how silence can be louder than shouting? That's what it felt like in that dining room. No one spoke after I called him out. Forks froze mid-air, glasses hovered halfway to lips, and all eyes locked on Mark. For once, he was smirking. He was scrambling. What the hell are you talking about, John? He snapped, his voice cracking just a little. You think you know something about my career? Please. You work some dead-end job, what would you know about corporate strategy? I leaned back in my chair, calm as could be, and gave him a little smile. Funny you say that. Because according to more than one person, your corporate strategy is just plagiarism and manipulation. His girlfriend shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My aunt muttered under her breath, "Oh my God," and my dad, who hates confrontation more than anything, looked like he wanted to disappear into his stuffing. Mark slammed his hand on the table, rattling the glasses. You're lying. You've always been jealous of me. Admit it. I tilted my head. Jealous? Of what, exactly? The way you throw tantrums like a kid? The way you brag about money you don't have? Or maybe I'm jealous of how you treat family, like we're all just your audience. Gasps went around the table. His face flushed deep red. Shut up, John. I didn't. No, see, I've been quiet for years, I continued, keeping my tone calm, almost conversational, like I wasn't even mad anymore. I let you take your shots, let you humiliate people, let you walk in here every holiday acting like you're king of the world. But tonight? Nah. Not anymore. Mark tried to laugh it off, but his voice wavered. This is pathetic. You're making stuff up because you can't stand that I'm more successful than you. I leaned forward slightly. Okay then. If you're so successful, tell us how's that loan going? That shut him up. His eyes widened just slightly. Just enough for me to know it hit a nerve. Oh, what, you didn't think people knew? I said, raising an eyebrow. Word gets around. Especially when you go around asking half the family for money behind closed doors. Now the room really stirred. My mom's fork clinked against her plate, my sister's jaw dropped, and my cousin whispered, "Wait, what loan?" Mark sputtered, That's none of your business." I smiled. Oh, but it's funny, isn't it? You brag all night about being rich and powerful, but in reality, you've been begging family members to float you cash just to stay afloat. His girlfriend shot him a sharp look. Mark, is that true? He turned on her instantly. Don't you start. She crossed her arms. No, answer the question. Now everyone was looking at him. And I just sat there, sipping my wine, watching him sweat. Fine. He exploded, slamming his fork down so hard a piece of pie went flying. Yeah, I borrowed money. So what? everyone borrows money sometimes. That doesn't mean I'm not successful. My uncle muttered, borrowing and never paying it back aren't the same thing, Mark. That drew a few sharp nods around the table. I leaned in again, my voice low, steady. Tell them how much, Mark. Go on. Tell them how much you owe. He glared at me, eyes practically burning. Shut your mouth. I shrugged. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Because last I heard, it was over 15 grand. And the last I checked, the only thing you've paid back is excuses. Gasps. Again. Mark's mom, my aunt, covered her mouth with her hand. His dad shook his head, muttering, unbelievable. The whispers turned into a low buzz, the whole table buzzing with shock and disbelief. Mark's smirk was long gone. He looked cornered, like a trapped animal. And I'll be honest, it was satisfying. But I was done. Because see, Mark's whole thing was control. He thrived on making others feel small so he could feel big. And now, he was shrinking right before our eyes. I looked at my daughter, who was still sitting quietly next to me, and I thought about how Head brushed her off earlier, how Head made her feel like she was worth a simple gift. So I said, you know what the difference is between us, Mark? You measure your worth by how much you can brag about. But I measure mine by how I treat the people around me. And from where I'm sitting, you've got nothing worth bragging about. The table went dead silent again. And then, slowly, my sister said, he's right. Then my cousin nodded. Yeah. He is. It spread like wildfire, murmurs of agreement, family members chiming in little by little, one by one, until the only person not speaking was Mark. Finally, he snapped. You're all pathetic, he shouted, shoving his chair back. Jealous losers, every one of you. You sit here, eating your cheap food, acting like you're better than me. You're not. You'll never be better than me. His voice cracked on that last word. He stormed away from the table, stomping into the living room. His girlfriend followed, but not before giving him a look that could have cut glass. The rest of us just sat there, stunned. Forks in pie, wine half drunk, the air thick with everything that had just been said. And me? I sat back, folded my arms, and let the silence do the rest. Because the truth was out now. The mask was off. Mark had been exposed and there was no taking it back. The silence after Mark stormed out was heavy, like smoke after a fire. Nobody moved at first. You could still hear his angry footsteps pounding upstairs, a door slamming shut like thunder. Then the floodgates opened. My aunt, his mother, was the first to break. She dropped her fork and practically hissed, "You had no right, John. No right to humiliate my son in front of everyone like that." Her voice cracked, shrill and defensive, and instantly the air grew 10 degrees hotter. I kept my composure. With all due respect, Susan, I didn't humiliate him. He did that all by himself. I just stopped covering for him. She gasped, like it slapped her. How dare you? He's accomplished more than anyone at this table. That's the problem, my sister cut in, surprising everyone. You've been coddling him since we were kids. Letting him treat people like garbage. Look around, Susan. Nobody here actually likes him. We just tolerate him because you insist on protecting his ego. Gasps. Murmurs. Heads turning. My aunt's face went red, and she clutched her wine glass like it was her only lifeline. That's not true. That's not true. My uncle, her husband, finally spoke up, voice low but firm. Susan. Enough. She whipped her head around. You're just going to sit there and let them attack our son? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Susan, I can't keep defending him. Not when I've had to cover his debts. Not when I've watched him insult everyone year after year. John just said out loud what we've all been thinking. The room went silent again, but this time, the silence was heavier on her. That's when the cousins started chiming in. "Remember last Christmas?" one of them said. "Mark mocked my wife's gift in front of everyone. She cried in the car on the way home." Another cousin added, "He called me a failure at Easter. Said my job was a joke." I laughed it off, but honestly, it cut deep. Voices piled on, one after the other. Little stories, long buried slights, years of resentment boiling over in real time. And I just sat there, watching the dam burst. My aunt tried to defend him at first, snapping, "He doesn't mean those things, he just speaks without thinking," but it was too late. Nobody was buying it anymore. Even her sister, my mom, leaned in and said, "Susan, we've all stayed quiet for too long. Mark's behavior has poisoned these dinners for years. Maybe it's time you stopped protecting him and started listening to us." Susan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. She just stared at her plate, trembling. Meanwhile, the younger generation, my kids, my cousins' kids, were wide-eyed, whispering among themselves, realizing they weren't the only ones who thought Uncle Mark was unbearable. It was like years of tension, years of fake smiles and swallowed anger, were finally breaking loose. And then came the cherry on top. Mark's girlfriend reappeared from the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes sharp. She stood at the end of the table, her voice cold. "I'm leaving," she announced. Heads turned. "Mark," she continued, "is a liar. And honestly, I should have seen it sooner. But tonight, I've heard enough." She grabbed her coat from the back of the chair, her heels clicking hard on the floor, and walked straight out the door. The slam echoed like a gunshot. The room erupted. Some people laughed nervously. Some shook their heads. Others whispered about how they knew it was only a matter of time. Susan started crying, whispering, "This isn't happening, this isn't happening," while her husband just sat in silence, staring into his drink like it could drown him. And me? I felt the strangest mix of things. Satisfaction, yes. Relief, definitely. But also a little sadness. Because as much as I hated Mark's behavior, as much as I relished the petty justice of it all, this was still family. And family tearing itself apart isn't easy to watch even when it's necessary. I raised my glass, gently tapped it with my fork, and said, "Well, happy holidays, everyone." A few people actually chuckled. Nervously. Awkwardly. But it broke the tension just enough for everyone to breathe again. Dinner went on. People picked at pie, sipped wine, and whispered in corners. But the mood had shifted permanently. Mark was just exposed. He was finished. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, next year's dinner might actually be peaceful. The dinner technically ended, but nobody really said goodbye. People left in waves, first the cousins with kids, ushering them out into the cold night, whispering excuses like bedtime and early morning. Then the quieter uncles and aunts who didn't want to get caught in the emotional wreckage, slipping on coats and muttering things like "thanks for dinner," as if the night hadn't just exploded into chaos. By the time the house was nearly empty, the atmosphere was like walking through smoke after a bonfire. Everything stank of something burned out, something ruined. The next morning, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Text messages. Missed calls. Family group chats blowing up with passive-aggressive one-liners and half-baked apologies. "I can't believe you embarrassed Susan like that, John. Honestly, someone had to say it. Good on you. Are we even doing Christmas next year? This family is falling apart." And, of course, one message from Mark himself: "You think you've won, but you've just made yourself an enemy for life. Don't forget who I am." I stared at that one for a long time. Then I laughed. Because what else can you do when the family tyrant finally has his crown knocked off, and all he can do is spit threats like a child? But here's the thing nobody talks about: revenge doesn't clean up the mess. Mark didn't disappear. He sulked. He raged. He tried to play the victim, posting cryptic rants online about backstabbing family and jealous losers. He even reached out to a few relatives privately, trying to spin the story, painting me as the bully, him as the wounded party. Some bought it. Most didn't. My aunt avoided me for weeks. When we finally spoke, she sounded older, tired. "You didn't have to humiliate him," she said softly. I answered just as softly, "He did that himself." I just held up the mirror. She didn't argue. But she didn't forgive me either. The real surprise was my uncle. A few weeks later, he called me. Not for small talk, not to yell. Just to say, "Thank you." I didn't know what to say at first. Then he explained. "I've been covering for him for too long. Loans. Favors. Lies." Susan kept pushing me to defend him, but I knew he was rotten inside. I just didn't have the guts to say it. "You did." That hit me harder than I expected. Because for once, someone else admitted what it carried for years. But the biggest shift? The cousins. At the next family gathering, a smaller one, without Susan and Mark, they treated me differently. Like it opened a door everyone had been too afraid to touch. One cousin leaned over, wine in hand, and whispered, "You know you're the reason we're all sitting here relaxed for the first time in forever, right?" Another just raised his glass in silent thanks. It was strange. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't even feel proud. Mostly I felt tired. But also lighter. Because that's the thing about exposing someone like Mark: it's messy, it's painful, it leaves cracks in the family that may never heal. But it also gives everyone a chance to breathe, finally. As for Mark, he never apologized. He never admitted fault. He just doubled down on his bitterness, isolating himself further each time he lashed out. And maybe that's the real revenge. Not the shouting match. Not the exposure at dinner. Not even the girlfriend walking out. The real revenge is watching someone destroy themselves, finally, with no one left to shield them. I still don't know if next year's holiday dinner will happen. Maybe it won't. Maybe the family's too fractured now. But if it does, I know one thing for sure. It'll be quieter. You know, people always ask me if revenge feels good. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it feels heavy, like carrying a stone in your chest. But when it's against someone who's been poisoning your family for years, when it finally clears the air for everyone else, that's not just revenge. That's justice. So tell me in the comments, have you ever had a family member like Mark? And what would you have done if you were sitting at that dinner table? Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of revenge, because trust me, I've got plenty more where that came from.